Oh, that's a weird preview. Okay, I think I'm live now. If so, my tea is actually at the counter. I need to go get that. Whoops. Okay. I'm not full screen. How do I become full screen? How do I do this? Does that work? This is all very new. We have different software that we're using to connect to YouTube, so it makes it a little more complicated. And like I mentioned, I'm not super tech savvy. That wasn't my skill set growing up, except with Neopets. I was really good at Neopets. Okay. Andy got an error message. And I'm just going to drink some water. Okay. Refresh your page. I got the same one, refreshed it a few times and showed up. Oh, that's Becky's message to Andy. So I'm good for talking and everything. Okay. Thank you, Kendra. Let me just get my tea. I'll be right back. And that way it lets people get acclimated. Hey, Jenna. Okay. Good morning. Yes, like Becky said, if you get an error, please refresh the page. That should fix it. This is new for me, just because Sammy's been the one who's been the man behind the computer, and now I have the power, and it's a lot of responsibility. Okay, so to get started with today, I have my tea in my donut-looking mug. Which, a funny story behind this is that there's two of these mugs that I have. And when I first moved into this nice apartment, we had just two mugs sitting in the cupboard chilling. And it was those two. I guess the guy who lived here before didn't really like use the apartment because he was mostly a traveling business person. So he left like some Coca-Cola in the fridge and these cool mugs, and it's a good memento from whoever lived here before. So, yeah. All right. So, how was everyone's weekend? Do you do anything fun? I know that I made some soup, which I don't know if that's fun. I think it is. I got some really cool vegetables and I made Italian wedding soup, which has like these tiny meatballs. And instead of putting spinach, I used kale. But today's not a cooking show. That's actually tomorrow's episode with Lisa and her daughter. They're going to be making that sausage bread. So as a reminder, if you want to cook along with her, we can post the ingredients. But basically, it's just like pizza dough, cheese, ground sausage, an egg. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else to that. So that's the deal with the sausage bread. Oh, Kendra finally got to paint. That sounds fun. She showed me what she wanted to paint on Friday. And then I'm glad she was able to paint. And Lisa can't wait to do her cooking show tomorrow. Hopefully, we'll have the technology figured out 100%. Becky watched Tiger King. I haven't done that yet. I'm nervous. I'm afraid. I'm like, am I ready to be part of this cultural phenomenon? And Andy got to see the northern pike running to spawn. That's a fish thing. So, oh, Lisa said pizza dough, eggs, cheese, sausage, hot or mild. And I guess Andy saw lots and lots of huge fish. That's cool. I will probably do Tiger King, the first episode, on my lunch break today because even though I am working from home, I'm still trying to stick to a schedule. And as a reminder, if you want to contact us, there's multiple ways you can do that. For my students, I gave them my cell. They can contact me via Remind, email, what have you. In general, we have Google Hangouts, and that's if you just contact GCC Upward Bound at gmail.com. You can contact us on Google Hangouts, and from 11 to 2, I think, or 11 to 3, Andy and I are going to manage that. So you can just hit us up with an email or a quick, like, instant message, and we'll respond. So that's that. And right now, Andy and Becky are fighting if I should watch Tiger King. I don't know. It's just like, it's part of the cultural zeitgeist right now. Oh, I thought Jenna said that she was playing with fire, not watching Playing with Fire. I was going to say, don't play with fire. There it is. Becky wrote gccupwardbound@gmail.com. Okay. Perfect. So now that I got a little bit of, weekend talk, we're going to talk about today's topic, which is sources. So in the little snapshot, I have this beautiful picture of this book called Notorious RBG about one of our greatest Supreme Court justices, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So the lesson's not going to be about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because honestly, I need to brush up my own knowledge about her. But the important piece of this conversation is about knowing what are reliable sources and which are not reliable sources. And you need to know that for many different reasons. So specifically with this pandemic that's happening, because it's the elephant in the room, you want to make sure that you are following reliable sources. So as much as, your uncle may think he knows a lot about viruses and vaccines, unless he is an epidemiologist or a doctor or a nurse, I wouldn't necessarily take his word as good advice to follow, So when it comes to this particular episode with the pandemic, Sammy and I and Andy have mentioned that you should rely on sources like the CDC or any other major health department sources. And recently our Governor Cuomo, has been doing these press briefings on a daily basis that he's been relying on information from the professionals in the health field. And when it comes to something that you don't know, that's the main idea, is you want to rely on the professionals who has studied this for years and who has devoted, 8+ years of their life to this particular subject area, and how are they continually doing that. So when you are a person who studies diseases, an epidemiologist, they do this in a few different ways, but I'm not going to go into the exact ways of how they study it, but they are the ones who have been on top of this. And you want to make sure that when you're looking at sources, whether they're news sources, that they are referring to those specialists. Does that make sense? As much as you want to just rely on, the people in power who you trust, it's important that they are also citing their sources too. So this is not a pointed comment towards any particular official, just so you know. But this is just to be aware as a person who's imbibing this material, that you have to make sure that when you are relying on someone else for a source of information, that you know their sources. Why? For safety. That's specifically for this case. But in general, when you are writing a paper, do you know how to rely on what are good sources versus bad sources? You can write that in the comments if you do know or not know. I know that your librarians have probably talked to you about this in school, which honestly, the librarians know everything. Like, they are so good. A quick, I had a paper recently that I had to find a bunch of resources for that were scholarly, peer-reviewed journals. I put it in quotes because that's what I actually needed to find. And I had a particular subject I had to look up, and it was really difficult until I contacted my library friend who guided me into the right direction. Smooth sailing from there. I got full credit on the assignment. So trust the librarians. I mean, that's who I would trust in this situation. Biased sources. So do you want me to talk about biased sources first? So when you are talking about finding a resource, you want to ensure that everything has a bias, but you want to figure out, does it have a pointed bias to a particular party, person, situation, what have you? Is someone trying to sell you something as a solution, or are they trying to give you information? Typically, when you're looking at websites, you're going to see them in a few different ways. So there's web pages that have advocacy, there's news web pages, there's personal ones that are like blogs or vlogs, there's professional web pages, and there's also scholarly web pages. So when you are looking through them, through the website, you have to see first, is it a .com? Is it a .edu? Is it .net, .gov, things like that. If you're dealing with international sources, you will also see whatever country that is. So like .fr is usually like a France-based country. Or not France-based country, but a France-based resource. So with .coms, you have to remember that .com means it's commercial. So usually they're trying to sell a product or service or something that is a for-profit entity. So as much as I enjoy BuzzFeed.com, it's not necessarily my go-to place for news or for resources that are scholarly and that will be helpful for papers of mine or things like that. They are trying to sell their website and whatever, and their advertisers. So that's something to keep in mind. For .gov websites, so they're coming from a government entity, you can typically trust those because they are being updated with mostly new information. Usually when you see local .gov websites, they're not necessarily incorrect, but sometimes they don't have the most accurate, up-to-date information if they don't have the infrastructure for people to actually update those web pages. .net is, a network. What else is there for web pages? I mean, in general, I try not to find just websites for my papers or for assignments when it came to school. I like to rely on books because they go through a very thorough vetting process for their sources. So I know I showed you this beautiful RBG book. So in order to create this New York Times bestseller, the authors had to go and do a bunch of research. So they had to look at both primary sources, and then they created a secondary source. So a primary source are things like their documents or their materials that came straight from a situation. I know that sounds a little like, I don't know. It sounded a little odd. Okay. I have a beautiful explanation of it. So primary sources are original documents of an event or discovery. So these can be surveys, interviews, letters, diaries. So like when you read like the diary of Anne Frank, that's actually a primary source because that was her actual diary. Scientific journal articles are actually primary sources because they're usually talking about a certain study that they did, and it's just releasing those studies' findings. It could also be videotapes and audio recordings or eyewitness news reports. But the one thing you want to keep in mind is that with specifically the internet, a lot of people edit videos. Like I could edit this video and change lots of things, but I don't really have the technical know-how, so I won't be doing that. But you want to ensure that, like, if you're looking at a video that you think is a primary source, you want to check to see if it's credible and see who took the video. Can you see the whole situation? Does it look like it's been edited, etc.? Secondary sources are going to be like this beautiful biography, where they're going to offer an analysis or a restatement about an event or a person, and it describes the primary sources. It also summarizes primary sources. So besides biographies, that you'll also see those for like textbooks and articles and editorials. So for instance, I'll show you in here. Should have had this page open. So you'll find like a picture of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and then they'll have a description about what was happening. So even though the picture was the original primary source, it also has the caption for what was happening. And so the authors took other sources and then analyzed what was happening in the picture or the scenario. And the way that I can check that is I can look in the back of the book and find a section for notes where you see lots and lots of notes. And usually it goes by chapter or even by sections of chapters. And there's even an index if you want to look up just specific topics within it. So say you want to look up the Voting Rights Act of 1965. You go to the index, which is at the back of the book, look up the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and then find the page number. In this particular book, when I mentioned the credits, there's actually image credits as well. So this particular author and editor did a great job at making sure that all sources were cited properly and showed that these weren't just fake images, that these came from real sources. Let's see. Oh, Andy says, yes, use books and peer-reviewed articles. Peer-reviewed essentially just means very smart people who work in that field have vetted the author. So oftentimes when you get to college, you will have professors who say, I need you to use 3 to 5 peer-reviewed articles or sources. So when you are using a database, you usually have the ability to have different checkboxes that you can do besides putting in your key terms. So you like type in your key terms. So I'm looking up Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And I want to make sure it's a peer-reviewed source. I don't have access to this textbook, but I need information about those topics. So I type in those keywords in whatever database that you're using. So in high school, oftentimes you'll use like ProQuest. But there's also other databases depending on the schools that you go to. You have free access to those databases, I want to add. So you type in those keywords, and then you have usually checkboxes for like, is it a full article? If so, I'm going to check that box off. Is it peer-reviewed? I'm going to check that box off. And by checking that box, it ensures that other people in that field, potentially legal scholars, have then checked that particular article or scenario about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the Voting Act right of 1965. But if you do have the ability to get books, I think that they're really helpful because you have the physical copy in front of you. With articles, you can download them and you can print them, but sometimes they're really long. Like articles in scientific journals or just academic journals in general will have like 30-page long articles, and you're like, oh, this is a lot of paper for me to print. So there's different resources that you can try to do with that. I know that like there's tips of like printing multiple pages on one page, but then the font's really small, but it works. Becky likes JSTOR. I do like JSTOR. I most recently fell in love with a database called Eric. It's a funny name, but it's specifically an education database, and it had a lot of really great resources. So with those databases, you can also divide it by different types. So is it an article from a journal? Is it a magazine article? Is it a review of a book? Is it a video? Like there's so many different ways that you can divide what you're looking up for in an online database so you can find the source that you need, which is pretty helpful. And I know that I was talking about nonfiction, and necessarily, like, it's not necessary. All you want to use nonfiction most of the time, but it's important that you have to think about like your subject areas. So say you're doing a paper about like first person perspectives on like a mental illness, for instance. You can also refer to like memoirs, which are still nonfiction, but it still has some fictionalized accounts. So if you want to write a paper, you want to diversify your sources. That's essentially a big thing. It's just diversify what you can get. And if you are unsure how to do that, contact your librarian, either the one at your school, your local librarian, or the one at your college, or if you have any librarian friends, and then they can help you with that. Do we have any questions so far? I know this is somewhat rambling. All right. I'm just going to give a few more tips in general. When you are looking at, when you are making sure that you are citing your sources, depending on whatever place you go to, whatever college or whatever high school, within your subject area, you follow different citation sources. So that could be MLA, which is like the Modern Language Association, APA, the American Psychological Association, Chicago, /Turabian. There's all these different types. And it's important that you look and follow the actual guides for that. And it may seem like pretty, I would say lame. It seems pretty daunting at first, but once you get into it, it's easy. And the reason why you have to cite is because you have to make sure that you're letting your professor know that you are not plagiarizing your paper. So plagiarizing just means that you're taking ideas from someone else who's already published. And that could be direct quotes, or even when you try to rephrase those quotes and you're still taking the source from someone else. If you're taking information from another person, cite it. That's my best advice. Even if you have a bunch of citations, that's okay. It's better to err on the side of caution and making sure that your sources are cited instead of getting an awkward conversation with a professor asking if you plagiarize and then potentially having to meet with other higher up representatives in a college, which that has never happened to me because I always cited my sources properly. Okay. I think I covered a decent amount. And, oh yes, you can also plagiarize yourself. That's important. Thank you for reminding me, Andy. So if you wrote a paper for a class about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, but then later you're in a different class about Supreme Court justices, for instance, because we're talking about legal stuff. So if you're writing another paper about Supreme Court justices, you can't just take information from a previous paper. You have to make sure that you cite yourself. And there's specific ways on how to cite yourself depending on the style of citation that you're doing. So if you don't cite yourself, that professor can see that you potentially plagiarized yourself. So don't do that. Okay. Tomorrow, I won't be on the screen. It'll be Lisa and her daughter. On Wednesday, Andy's going to be on the screen. He's going to talk all about finances and adulting and just like really teaching you like what are all the things you need to know when you get like your first job. Thursday, we'll have a special guest, which might just be on Andy's end. We'll see. And then Friday will be Fun Friday. So that's in general the plan for the week. Kendra says we have to submit papers to turn it in. I don't know what you mean by that. Lisa's excited to cook. I'm excited to cook. I don't have pizza dough, but I definitely want to make this sausage bread later because I do love bread. Okay. I'm just waiting for what Kendra means by we have to submit papers to turn it in. And then after that, I'll end the stream unless we have any other comments or questions. Other books I brought to show you while I wait for comments or questions, just because I want to show off my book collection. I have The Year in the Life of Downton Abbey. This was a Christmas gift from my sister. And it's all about Downton Abbey stuff, which is fictional, but based in real life historical things. So it had lots of great resources and pictures, and then there's recipes. So this is a pretty cool book. I'm going backwards. If you like period dramas, aka stories that are set in old times, Downton Abbey is the way to go. It's basically a soap opera, but with like early 1900s British people. Oh, Kendra says it's a website that tells the teachers if we plagiarized at all. That's true. So a lot of teachers and professors are now using these databases that are not like online. They're not article databases. They're specifically ones for plagiarism. So last night when I turned in a paper for my grad school assignment, I had to check a box that said I'm willing to submit this to the global database of blah, blah, blah to ensure that I wasn't plagiarizing my paper. So that's one way that they can do it. But I mean, also there's professors are still able to figure it out because they know when someone is writing at a certain level and then all of a sudden they're sounding super academic, or all of a sudden their writing style has changed. It's pretty easy. I've caught people plagiarizing before, and then I've had to be like, no, don't do it, when I was a writing tutor. Another book I wanted to show you, because I'm just show and tell for the end of this conversation, is The Gateway to Freedom. This guy, Eric Foner, he actually came to GCC, and I got this book signed by him. He is a Pulitzer Prize winning author, historian, and one of the high schools, I think Alexander High School, uses his textbook for AP US history. So he's pretty well credited. Good stuff. And then I'll just show you one more. This was a great resource that I wanted to show you just because they had an extensive note section and index. So this book, The New Jim Crow, is specifically about the prison system and about race, and specifically how race plays along into the American prison system. So this author took extensive notes, 30 pages of notes actually. Okay. Notes, thorough. I'm probably going to show you more books later on. Not today. So all of these notes, and then after the notes, then there's an extensive index section. So I can still look up things by topic areas or by person if I need to. So this would be an excellent resource if I was writing a paper about either race in America or about the prison system, etc., because I know that it has been a highly vetted source that has gone through multiple editors with lots of different resources. So I think that's all. About 29 minutes, almost 30. So I'm going to end it for today. I appreciate you sitting with me and listening to me talk about resources. I know that sometimes it's not like the most exciting topic, but it's really important that you know that, because on social media, people are always sharing news and stories, but it's not always accurate. And for yourself as a person, you need to know what are reliable sources for your own safety. And also, so you're not perpetuating these fake news pieces, I suppose. You just have to ensure that you are looking at a source, seeing if it's a credible one via, like, with an author. What is the source of the piece? Is it a reliable institution or organization? And you want to see if there's other professionals who have vetted it, who have looked at it and said, yeah, this is accurate. In order to do that, that makes you a great scholar, and it will help you immensely when it comes to writing any paper that comes your path. So if you have questions, just contact me, because all I'm doing is writing papers nowadays anyway. I'm like working and writing papers, and that's about it. And I may not be an expert, but I have a good amount of advice and resources. So later today, I'm going to post a source from the University of Michigan that actually breaks down resources really well if you missed my video or you stepped in and out of it. So I'll post that later on Facebook and today, and I hope that you have a great rest of your day. Enjoy your tea if you're drinking along with me, or whatever you have, water, coffee, orange juice, etc. All right, I'll see you tomorrow.